Okay, I think we're live. Yes, we are. All right. Good morning, everyone, wherever you are. If you're in Sydney, it's a nice or Melbourne, nice fresh morning. Thanks a lot for joining us. Now, this morning we have Greg from Target TechTarget. Greg is usually based in Sydney, but today he's in Singapore, so it's super early at his end. Good morning, Greg.
Yeah, good morning, Shane. Thanks for the intro. And yes, when I agreed to do this, I thought that I would be in Sydney, so it's a little bit earlier than expected, but I'm an early riser, so that's fine.
No, I appreciate it. Appreciate it. If the first of all, really appreciate you jumping on the call, but also if the audio gets choppy, it usually gets smoothed out. So just for everyone to bear with us. But let's jump in because I know everybody probably wants to head off to the office. Greg, can you tell us at the very beginning a little bit about yourself, and maybe a quick background on TechTarget?
Yeah, happy to. Um, so yeah, as Shane mentioned in the intro, Greg Anderson, I oversee TechTarget sales team across Asia Pacific, and I've had the unique journey with TechTarget entering my 13th year, where I've been able to work in global offices in the US and Singapore and now in Sydney. And as a business, what we do is we work exclusively with B2B tech companies to help them better optimize their sales and marketing efforts. And glo-
Sorry about that.
it's all right. So as a business, effectively at the core, we're a publisher. We own and operate a network of 150 unique websites that we create content, curate content, and attract large audiences of technology buyers. And through that, we're capturing a lot of interesting things about their behaviors, their interests, their intent in purchasing. So the value that we really provide for a lot of these global multinationals down to smaller local VARs and resellers is the ability to identify various tech buying teams who are interested in really any enterprise technology, hardware, software services at any point in time. And we've really shifted that business from being a publisher to really an intent provider now, where we're able to go in and recommend. We're able to go in and not only help them with the media side of things, but also identifying relevant accounts and relevant contacts and providing best practices on sales outreach, marketing outreach. So we've really shifted the business pretty drastically in the last 4 or 5 years.
Awesome. Sorry for that. We're having a fire drill here in the office, all of a sudden out of the blue. So that was definitely unexpected. But thank you so much for that intro, Greg. Now we're going to talk about everything about intent data and intent marketing today. Can you tell us a little bit at the very beginning, maybe a bit of introduction of how do you define intent marketing and intent data? What is that for you in TechTarget, and how do you define it?
Yeah, I can hear that fire drill, and I appreciate you sitting in that seat. It's brave of you still. Hopefully it's just a drill. So intent marketing, every 2 or 3 years you get a new buzzword in marketing, and it's typically things that marketing and sales teams have been putting into effect for years. But over the last 2 or 3 years, I think it's really been hyped up. And really what intent marketing is leveraging behavioral data from individuals and organizations to identify potential targets who are most likely interested in your products or services. So moving from typical demographic and firmographic filters to true behavioral filters in terms of identifying the right prospects and organizations.
Yeah, that's really interesting because, as you said, the data-driven marketer is a term that is being thrown out quite a lot. And previously, it was all about there was a transition, right? And we've seen a transition from people talking about, all right, we need to have demographic information, and then firmographic information, and then has developed into technographic, and now we're talking behavioral. Um, when we talk about behavioral, can you give us a little bit of an example of how that looks like, in the real context?
Yeah, sure. And so there's a number of different kinds of behavioral data that organizations are capturing. I typically come at things from B2B marketing side of things, specifically in the tech industry, which I think from a B2B side are typically the leaders in that. But intent can be something as simple as landing on a company's website and tracking that cookie or IP address. So effectively, there's a few different types of intent data, known versus unknown. So I would categorize that as unknown, where somebody lands on your web page and you can track it back to a device or even an IP address if you do a reverse IP lookup. And then additionally beyond that is for any of us who filled out a form to access, actually, for example, this webcast. Anybody who's coming to this webcast would have filled out a form, and you're effectively showing intent around your interest in intent marketing. So that's basically what we're talking about.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. Sorry, I have to keep switching between mute and unmute just in case they decide to say something else on the mic. All right. Now, different types of, you covered the different types of intent data. What is the area that TechTarget kind of focuses on? Is the bread and butter of TechTarget? Is it the whole array of the main two types of intent data, or is it a specific area? Like, what differentiates TechTarget?
So for us, it's everything that we do. We live in the first party, primarily known intent data. So people coming to our sites are opting in for content, and that allows us to identify really what they're interested in terms of topics, but track their engagements with various topics over time. So first party, it's probably worth taking a step back and talking about the different types beyond just known and unknown. So for us, when I say first party, I'm talking about my data. So what I directly observe in my websites with contacts that I have in my database. Other types of data would be second party data. That would be your data. So if I was to come to you and frankly ask for, everybody that's landed on the xGrowth sites or everybody that's attending this webcast, I want to be able to see that data because I can add that to mine. And then the other one is third party data. That would be, classified as their data. That would be me coming to you and asking you to provide data from maybe other websites that you're able to access through pixeling and various tracking and web scraping and things, and tasking you with aggregating it. Other ways to look at it would be, folks who are building a third-party customer data platform, for example.
Yeah, right. And so if I'm a marketer, right, and I'm considering intent data, looking at these three different categories of data collection, in order to tell me, the business owner, that company A and company B are looking for the services that I'm selling, and therefore I can go and approach them. Capturing this data, what does the marketer need to be aware of? Like, what are some of the components that between these three different categories a marketer should be wary about, and be able to identify the right source and the right kind of data and not be misled?
Yeah, that's an important question. And as the market continues to get a lot more crowded in terms of offerers who are all effectively telling the same story of, I can tell you exactly which accounts you want to target and get you data from the individuals at those accounts to make sure that you can power your sales and marketing efforts. That's pretty common. And for any marketers that are on this webcast, I'm sure you've got dozens of folks reaching out on LinkedIn and phone calls and emails, pretty much all saying the same thing. So it's important to ask a few questions within a couple different categories, I think, to really get to the truth of where this data comes from and is it going to be valuable for me. So the first thing is source. So you're always going to want to ask your provider who's offering you any sort of access to intent data, what is the actual source? And with a second party, that's pretty easy. So if you were coming to me to ask for TechTarget's data, I can tell you that it comes directly from our websites. So I have direct observed intent data from my audience. I can show you the pages that I'm collecting this intent data on. And more importantly, because we do capture known data, I can show you the individuals that I'm collecting that data on. So second party is probably pretty straightforward. Same idea with LinkedIn if you're going to work with folks there. It's when you get into the third party intent data that you really need to start asking really deep questions. So there's companies out there like the Big Willow and Bombora that have large networks of publishers that they have access to their websites through pixeling that are effectively tracking IP addresses, web scraping against certain tagged topics. You want to make sure you're figuring out what the source is of that data. Some of these companies won't tell you exactly where they're capturing it. So, for example, if they're going to come and tell you that Commonwealth Bank is interested in a cloud computing solution. Now, how do you know that? What websites are you tracking that information on? And what individuals are you tracking that against? Because Combank's got 50,000 employees, each of which are browsing the web across a number of different sites with various levels of intent and interest in cloud computing. You want to make sure that you're understanding where that source is. The second area I would say is, what is the context? So if you can identify maybe that source is they've got access to sites like Forbes or CNN or a few other tech sites, for example. What is the context of the information where you're gathering that intent? So what is the article focused on? What type of content is it that they're actually engaging with? A good example I always like to give is sticking, I guess, within the tech space is we focus a lot on cloud computing and cloud security, which I think if everybody's on this has somewhat of an idea of what that is. But if I want to go after somebody who's interested in that particular solution, there's a lot of websites that talk about cloud security. And I've got an example in a presentation that I give where I'll show a site on the left by Forbes that is classified as security, but the article is all about iPhone, iCloud security. And an article on the right is talking about key considerations when migrating certain workloads to the cloud. Both of those talk about cloud security as a topic, but the context is very, very different. So if we're tracking, again, Commonwealth Bank, to stick with that example, their behavior across the web, as mentioned, there's 50,000 employees there, and that IP address is going to show up on a lot of different sites. The first article I mentioned about the iCloud could be an intern trying to figure out what happened when their iPhone got hacked. But that is throwing off a signal that Commonwealth Bank is interested in cloud computing. We're on the right side, and nobody's reading that type of content unless they've got specific interest in it. So when you're dealing with the unknown area, that's really important to understand the context and where it comes from. And then the third category you want to start asking questions about is, how long is this data is valid? You know, if you're telling me that there's intent for an individual or an organization, what is the window that you're looking at within that intent? Because it's going to vary it's going to vary depending on what the solution you have. I think, for example, in the consumer space, all of us have probably been to a travel website and we've gone and we've searched for a trip to Bali. And for the next 2 or 3 weeks, we're going to be seeing ads from Qantas and other airlines offering discounted flights to Bali. Well, they picked that up from your device, and now they're retargeting you that way. But in the airline industry, that data is typically valid for maybe 2 weeks, maximum 3 weeks, if they identify that intent is valid and that you'll actually make a purchase. So if you're talking about B2B tech, at TechTarget, we look at things within a 90-day window. But you're always going to want to ask, how long is this data actually valid, and why is it still showing intent? An interesting way that I think everybody can do that and conceptualize it is, there's a large customer data platform called BlueKai, BLUE space Kai, Kai, that was acquired by Oracle. What BlueKai does is they aggregate all these different data points from across the web and various devices, and they synthesize it down to what you specifically are interested in. you can go to the website. It's just bluekai.com/registry. And it will actually tell you what intent data they've captured on you, as well as different demographic information. And you can see where there's certain flaws in that, and it's tied to some of your web browsing, but also in mine, for example, it shows that I'm interested in Nissan Maximus, which was a car that I had in 2007 and haven't had since 2009. But if Nissan is looking for people interested in their particular products, they might end up purchasing my data because I would still be classified as having intents around that. So a lot of questions you want to ask to get to, just to kind of recap that, the source of where that's coming from, the context in which it's being classified as intents, and the duration. How old is the data?
And Greg, what about, I think you're absolutely right about those 3 points, but what about the probability of the intent, right? So if we're talking about ANZ, and ANZ has one employee that has looked this up, looked one article, versus ANZ has had 20 employees looking at a total of 50 articles, right? Is there something to consider over there with regards to the probability of the intent?
Yeah, yep, absolutely. And those are ways that we're starting to see marketing and sales teams become a lot smarter in how they use the data. So the data is available, and the way that you synthesize it and make inferences from it is starting to be really important. And that comes down to certain things as simple as lead scoring or account scoring. So, when an account shows a certain type of behavior, like you said, where they've looked at 15 to 20 pieces of content, that intent is a lot more valuable than somebody that's just looked at one. And we're now seeing marketing and sales teams use the multi-touch model, use the multi-folks in the buying team model when they see engagements there to score an account higher than another account. That's a really simple way to make sure that you're focusing on the right organizations and the right individuals who are more receptive probably to your message at any point in time than those that might just be starting their journey.
Yeah, fair enough. And I think this is a really good segue into, you talked about sales and marketing team and multi-touch campaigns. Where does intent data you usually see come in a marketing campaign? How do marketers or sales teams incorporate intent data into a campaign that they might run?
Yep. So for the most part, it's got to come from, first you want to look internally at maybe your first party intent, and you do need some level of marketing automations to capture and activate that. A lot of people think that might come from their CRM system if they're using Salesforce or Dynamics, for example. I wouldn't always classify that as intent, because that engagements within those systems they're manual. Sales reps are having to add them, marketers are having to add them. So you need some level of Marketo or Eloqua, using tools like HubSpot as well to be able to capture that and then activate that. So that's using your first party intents. Or if you're strapped from marketing resources, you can go to second parties, provide some criteria of what you think is your ideal customer profile, what you think are the right signals from an intent perspective. And those organizations can activate a campaign on your behalf. So TechTarget does that for a lot of our customers, and I know that you do that on behalf of a lot of your customers as well.
Yeah, gotcha. Cool. I want to know if I want to quickly see if there are any questions. I don't think any questions have come up. I just want to say if there are questions around intent marketing and intent data, please feel free to drop them in the comment section. We'll have a look and go through them. But look, I mean, intent data is part of a bigger picture of B2B marketing, which I think is really transforming in the specifically in Australia. It's maybe in some of the early stages compared to some of the later points in the US comparatively. What do you think is in store for intent, but also in the bigger picture, B2B in Australia in the next 5 years, both based on what you see here in Australia and what we're seeing in the US and some of the other markets?
Yeah, it's a big question, but I think we're seeing the trends shift to where people are starting to understand the value and use cases, and more importantly, the expected results of using intent data. A few years ago, this wasn't a topic that was brought up amongst the customers that we have in Australia, but it was a topic that was global. And oftentimes the feedback we would get is, well, our corporate team in North America, if it's a multinational, handles everything from an intent perspective. They do all of our data aggregation. They leverage everything from a MarTech stack. They're handling all of our nurture streams through Marketo and things like that. So it was a very much hey, they're going to handle it for us. So I think as time goes on more in Australia, it's making a lot more sense, and not only just Australia, but across other markets across APAC, is that the local teams are going to take more control of the intent side of things in a sales and marketing perspective. The markets are different. The data that you can collect is very different. The volume of it is substantially smaller than it is in North America. So oftentimes we would see, again, sticking to the multinationals, where strategy would come down from North America that wants to target a very, very niche audience, where in North America it might be a broader audience, but if you try to focus on it in Australia, it's almost impossible to be able to pull that off because the volume of data isn't there. So in short, I think the local teams are going to start taking more control over that, working better together with sales on that side of things as well. And I think this is probably more in the 3-5 years down the line. Marketers get it. Marketers understand the value of data, what they can expect from an outcome perspective when they add it to a sales or a marketing cadence. What I hope will then follow is the KPIs that they've got on them as to what they're supposed to be doing with that data. I think right now they're pretty restrictive and focused on revenue and pipeline, which is important at the end of the day, but doesn't always allow marketers to be strategic in building out different customer profiles and creating a long-term nurture journey. So I think the KPIs will hopefully get in line with what should be expected and achievable from smart marketing. But then I think the next and the final phase is for sales to get more on board with marketing. And there's always and this is coming from a sales guy, there's always a discussion about sales and marketing getting in line. And I think that marketing is far beyond where sales is at in terms of their understanding of the value of data when it comes to approaching a customer. The best sales reps that we see are leveraging social selling or leveraging data, but they're not making the connections as to what marketing is doing for them and using the tools and dashboards that they have. So I think that we're going to see sales is really the next thing that needs to get in line in terms of understanding how to use data, working more hand in hand with the marketing team, and really understanding all the power that they can provide to them, frankly, before they go into a meeting, before they create an outreach cadence as to who they should be talking to, what they should be saying to them, and what they should be expecting as a result of those engagements.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, yeah, the second point that you raised is sales, sales and marketing alignment and that getting really mature. But also the first one is very interesting, where the US would say, this is a specific market that we're targeting, and in Australia they're like, well, that's just a handful of companies here. So that business model is not gonna work. And you see that I think I've come across it multiple times where niching is very important, and the conversation is niche down as much as possible. Where in some markets like Australia, it's really hard to niche down. It's just the addressable market is just not big enough when you go niche. So that's very interesting. You say that you see that the marketing team locally is taking over and they're adjusting that approach, that marketing approach.
Yep.
Now you talked about the data, I'm going to come back to this and what is available and what's not available. I'd love to talk about, how, because the data laws are maybe a little bit more restrictive here in Australia, not maybe as restrictive as what it is in Europe after the GDPR. But I'd love to come back and talk about this. We got two questions that maybe we'll go through those first, and then we come back to the data privacy and all of that. So the first one is, the easiest way for someone to get into intent marketing, specifically through social media, is, how would you, if somebody is a freelancer and they want to, they're starting their career and they want to get into intent marketing, what would you say is a good way for them to approach the topic?
So if they're a freelancer and they want to get into the business, first I hope they've got a certain level of knowledge about that. So it's either that or they've got to make sure that they, attend webcasts like this, and educate themselves on things. But then from there, it's if you understand how to do intent marketing, it's very easy to go into tools like Twitter and Facebook and LinkedIn to a certain extent with the intent data, and start to identify a target market of companies that actually could benefit from it, looking at the relevant titles, but then finding folks that are engaging with intent data type content. So you're not going to have a big marketing budget. You're not going to be probably creating relationships with too many second and third parties to be able to get this data, but you can start following different hashtags for ABM, B2B marketing, intent data, start engaging with those folks socially, and you'll start to build up a decent book of business on that side. So I would say first thing is obviously education, making sure that you can support this. You can talk the talk for that. And then the second would be finding the people that actually have your need, and then using what you know about intent data. Is anybody sharing or engaging with content around that are going to be good folks to go and start to talk to?
Yeah, I think you're definitely right. I think in the old sense of intent data, it's all about list building, right? And then in that list building component, adding that information, that extra information, where it becomes relevant to both sales and marketing to leverage that information to push through a sale. And just to add to what you mentioned, I think it's good to understand what niche you want to work in, and then build that list kind of, and then, as you said, through Facebook, through Twitter, through LinkedIn, through the companies that you're targeting with their blog posts and what they're posting, what kind of announcements they're making. All of that could be nurturing the intent data of a certain segment that you're looking at. As you said, it's very hard to go add that individually and capture all that information because there's so many data points, but it probably is a starting point.
Yeah, you've got to start. So I think you've got to start somewhere on that, and I would actually just even to add to that, I think when people hear intent marketing, intent data, even digital marketing as well, we've worked with marketers who've been in the industry for years, and those terms scare them. They scare them because they feel like they're really loaded, and there's a lot to know and there's a lot to understand behind that. So if you're somebody who's a consultant and actually wants to go and get into the industry, be able to simplify that stuff. There's a lot of marketers that are maybe not willing to have conversations internally about what they don't know, but we'll have conversations with you and you can help educate them a little bit. It's not that complex when you break it down using simple logic. So there's a lot of, I think, need and perceived value in bringing somebody on that has any level of expertise in how to define the terms. What is intent marketing? What is first, second, third party data? What's known? What's unknown? What's a cookie versus an IP address? That information is valuable, and you can build some relationships around that. It's simple. You don't have to go and bring a MarTech stack to somebody immediately.
Yeah, that's so true. I think the marketing space, it's a little bit, sometimes a little bit of it's unclear of what these terminologies mean, and sometimes it can become very scary But once you basically unveil the concept, it becomes a lot simpler.
Yep.
Cool. The other question that we got is, how do you automate? How do the automation tools capture the intent data? Is it from a form, from the forms? Now, we've kind of covered this, but you want to really quickly touch on it again, of how the capturing happens for the intent data, Greg?
Yeah, so there's effectively, there's two ways to do it. One, through a form fill. That's pretty straightforward. Name, email address, that goes straight into your platform. And the other is through pixeling or adding JavaScript to any landing pages or content. So pixels in JavaScript will allow you to track two things. That's the cookie, that's the individual device and browsing data for that individual. And then that's the IP address, which sometimes you can actually match back to an overall organization. But that's as simple as it is, and you can get more sophisticated by tagging things with various topics as well. So now you'll capture some engagement data, but also topic and content type. But it comes down to pixels, JavaScript, and form fills.
Gotcha. Thank you very much for that. Let's go back to the data, the privacy, data security, all of, well, not data security, but privacy specifically. How, what are some of the changes that, you kind of see in Horizon? Actually, before talking about this, tell us a little bit about what's different from data privacy and specifically in the intent data space between Australia and another country, like the US.
So there's a lot of nuances, I'd say, between Australia and US and Europe, which everybody I think is familiar with the acronym GDPR, whether they know what that means or not. But the data regulations in North America to date have been a little bit more lax, I'd say, than anybody else. Sticking to the whole idea of free speech is that if you land on a website, that site can take your data. If you fill out a form fill, there's probably some terms in there you might not have seen, or if there were terms at all, they can take that data and resell it anywhere. That is actually changing quite a bit globally. In Australia, it's a little bit more restrictive in that you actually have to have more direct consent from an individual to add them to marketing automation. You can always do one-to-one touch points for any individual, but you need to have some sort of confirmed or at least inferred opt-in in Australia. So it's a little bit more strict, but it's not tremendously strict. What I think is going to happen trend-wise, and what we did see last May with GDPR, is that you need to make sure that everybody you've got in your database is opted in to hear from you, that you've got an entire history of those individuals to show when and where they opted in case you're ever audited for that. And that started out in Europe for GDPR, but that impacts all global companies that are doing business with Europe. So if you have anybody from Europe in your database, that needs to be compliant. But we just saw Canada has increased their privacy laws. Germany has always been very strict with the double opt-in. And North America is going to start to go, we're seeing it state by state now. So California has a Data Privacy Act of their own, which is very similar to GDPR. That includes personal data, name, email, phone, but also your browsing data as well. So you need to make sure you're grabbing consents. New York has one, I think, in legislation right now. So it's not is this going to happen? It's a when. And for a customer, I think it's a good thing. For marketers, I hope it's a good thing because hopefully you've done the right things in terms of building your database. For TechTarget, it's a good thing. We've always been GDPR compliant. So that's going to hopefully, frankly, remove some competitors from our space. But what it all means is you have to be really smart about how you're capturing data, and then how you're using that data, and are you violating any laws? Because there are some big fines that have started to come down from that.
Right. And I mean, the privacy component is a very hot topic. But what do you think is going to happen in the next months or years here in Australia? Any opinions on that?
I don't think we'll see anything in the next months. My opinion on things is I think that Australia has a more of a wait and see policy on how things play out from a Europe and North America perspective when it comes to tech in general as marketing. So I think we're going to wait and see what's going on with GDPR, what's going to happen with the data privacy in North America, but also we really haven't seen how that's tested people's ability to be successful in marketing and successful in data capture. And we haven't seen too many cases where lawsuits have come out. And I think once we start seeing one or two of those come out where an organization is hit with a large class action fine or something like that, then we're going to see some action take place. We're seeing it on the cybersecurity side of things with data protection in terms of not allowing people to get into your systems and leak information. There's a lot of fines that are going out for that. But we haven't seen it, at least to my knowledge, in any significant extent for people violating the usage of data from a marketing perspective. Once that happens, I think that will create a snowball effect that will move pretty quickly.
Yeah, I see. That's interesting. We've got one more question, which is kind of similar to what we kind of covered, but let's have a look at it. So the question is, how much content or how many touch points would we need to identify the intent data?
It's a good question.
That's a tricky question, I guess, but yeah.
The true answer is it depends. It depends on your business. It depends on what your customer is. Consumer side of things, that's pretty straightforward. It's usually one or two. In the world that we work in, from a B2B tech side of things, we typically need to see anywhere between 4 and 7 touch points before a buyer is actually interested in speaking with a vendor. And it's actually worth kind of unpacking that a little bit. We do a media consumption study every year. I think I talked to you a little bit about it, where we survey our audience and ask them, one, how they prefer to engage, how they prefer to do their pre-purchase research, what types of content they use, what sources they use, and how they prefer to engage with sales reps. And oftentimes they want 4 to 7 touch points. But the logic behind that is, as a buyer, historically, it's really until the internet and more information is available, the buyer has always been at an information disadvantage until now all of the data points are available and the case studies and the white papers and third-party vendor reviews. So a buyer wants to be as educated as a seller, if not more, about their own products as well as the competitive landscape. So there needs to be a good level of engagement and understanding on the buyer's front before they're ever going to be willing and comfortable to have a conversation with sales. So we look at 4 to 7 touch points in B2B tech. I would go at least 2 to 3 if you're looking at anything in B2B before you have a meaningful conversation and outreach.
That's really interesting. Actually, let's talk about that. What are the kind of what additional information can you give us when you're working with some of these clients? So some of the clients that you work with where you are offering or you're talking to them about intent data, who are the clients that you see that benefit the most from introducing intent data into their cadences, or not cadences, but into their marketing operation?
Clients that benefit the most from it, I mean, it sounds like a simple answer, the ones that can actually execute on it. And there's a lot of different things that go into that, but it's, say, the ones that can execute on it, but the ones that have a more logical expectation about what the outcome is going to be, and they've got an agreement with sales on what that is. So I'll give you an example. Is oftentimes we'll have a customer come to us and say, we want to look at everybody who's in the finance space or the HR space that's interested in HR software and that have this particular profile. And we'll say, okay, that's great. We can look in and see what type of activities we have and intent data we have around that. Once we give that to you, what is the next step? And that next step needs to be, do you have relevant content to share with them that's going to speak to that intent data or to that persona? Does sales have the ability to have that conversation and to move that forward, or their sales plays that align? So the companies that do it the best are the ones that do have a full baked out strategy of what types of intent data are going to be valuable. But then once I have that, do I have next steps in place in terms of marketing automation, but also sales to be able to move that forward? And then it always comes back to expectations. You can't take a piece of data, a piece of contact information, and turn that into a sale in a month or 2 months. Those just aren't relevant expectations.
Yep.
So we're seeing a lot of things shift in the attribution model from, you've got X input and that needs to equal Y output. The smarter organizations are building intent data into the scoring throughout their attribution model. And not only just third-party data, second-party data, even their first-party data. So I think a lot of it is tied to execution, but also attribution, and frankly, a lot of expectations.
Yeah, basically, so that means tying it into their scoring system means that they would look at two companies that would come in, and let's just super simplify this, but two companies that come in and both of them download a white paper or in a case study, and then one is layered with intent data that says this company is in the market looking for this the exact solution that you're selling, and one doesn't have that information, and therefore the first option gets ranked higher, gets higher score. Is that what you mean by kind of implementing it in their scoring system?
Yeah, exactly. So being able to prioritize contacts and accounts using the data, but also making sure that they understand where that data is coming from and the value of that.
Gotcha. Look, I've kind of gone through all the questions that I've had. Is there anything else that you think we should talk about or share on this call?
The only other thing I probably wanted to touch on, or maybe to leave as a parting piece of advice, is there's so much data that's available to marketing and sales teams that a big error that I see often is that people go a little bit crazy with it, and they create this super ideal customer profile of, I think we need these 10 companies that are showcasing this type of behavior, and then these 3 or 4 titles within those organizations, and that's exactly who we want to talk to. And I think that's great. You should have that ideal customer profile, but that shouldn't limit your focus only to those individuals. So I think a piece of advice would be, just because the data is available and the filtering and the targeting is available, that shouldn't be your sole focus. Use that maybe as a primary audience, but don't.
Sorry, Matt. I don't know what's going on today.
I'd say don't overlook the other organizations that can be in marketing or actually showing that intent, and maybe they don't fit into your perfect box of a company size or a key title, or even a location or an industry. But if these guys are showing intent around the topic, your solution, it's somebody that you should investigate, and maybe just investigate from a marketing perspective and not sales yet. But I see a lot of people missing opportunities because they've refined their targeting to the point where they're excluding 99% of the total addressable market that they could and should be going after.
Yeah, I think that's very, you're absolutely right. That's very valuable insight, especially in the Australian market where, again, the size of the market is much smaller, and therefore you might have a hard time finding those really qualified accounts. All right, Greg, this has been amazing. I mean, the insights, the comments, and all the golden nuggets that you've dropped. This was absolutely amazing. Thank you so much for joining. Now we're gonna have the recording of this. I'm so sorry. I don't know what's happening today in the office. But the recording is going to be available. I'll make it quick before they ring the bell again. The recording is going to be available, so feel free to look out for that. We're going to have our next webinar out as well very soon on scaling businesses, so keep an eye out for that one as well. But that's a wrap for this one. And again, Greg, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. It was fun. Thanks for having me.
Absolute pleasure. Take care.
Bye, guys.
Bye bye.